Hello everyone, I'm Rebecca and welcome back to my sewing room. So if you've been around my channel for a little while, you might know that I am kind of obsessed with Disney. I mean, heck, I've got the fairy godmother and Cinderella sitting right behind my sewing machine as I sew all the time. And in normal years, I travel to Disney all the time and I even used to work there. So yeah, I really like Disney. And so when I heard that a bunch of other costumers were doing historical Disney projects, I thought to myself, well, last year I did 2 historical Disney projects. Should I do another? Yes, of course! So then I started wondering, what project should I do? One of the projects that has actually been on my to-do list for this year for a fall trip to a Disney park is a 1950s version of Cinderella's pink dress, her mouse and bird made dress that the stepsisters tear apart. And I have been planning to make a version of that to wear to the parks for Dapper Day. So my first thought was, well, could I make that? My second thought was yes, but that's not enough. So then my third thought was, well, could I make that but bigger or even twice? And that's exactly what I'm doing. I actually then went and was scrolling through my fashion plates for inspiration, and I found this fashion plate right here, which oddly enough is from 1836, because I have an 1830s problem. So that's a thing. But it's an 1830s dress that, in my opinion, is 1830s does 1780s. Like, this thing is such an 18th century style dress, but with the fuller skirt of the 1830s and with 1830s hair and bonnet. Kind of like how if you go and see a movie, they put them in costumes that look mostly oldish, but they still do modern hair and hats and makeup and all that sort of stuff. Yeah, that sort of thing. So the plate itself, I did have Liz of Liz Capism help me translate the French of the plate. It doesn't say anything about it being a fancy dress costume, but in my opinion, this is a fancy dress costume, or at least this is like 1830s history bounding 1780s, which just kind of like gives me a little bit of cheer too, because in most versions of Cinderella, this dress that she first goes to wear to the ball is supposed to be her mother's dress. And yes, this would be more like a grandmother's dress if it's 50 years old, but I still think that it kind of works as that like historical mashup. And of course, I'm taking a dress that is 1950s meets fantasy and turning it into 1830s meets 1780s anyway, so we are all over the map, and you know what? Accuracy doesn't matter so much in that case. Which is probably a good thing, because I had not intended to do this project, and I've tried to be fairly good about like shopping from the stash, but I don't have pink fabric in my stash. So I didn't want to go out there and spend $200 to $300 of silk on this project. That was not in my budget, was not in my timeline. Heck, this dress wasn't in my timeline. So I looked up where I could find inexpensive poly fabric, because just by using poly fabric, it really should not affect your worth as a costumer. Like, it is okay to use poly fabric if that is what is in your budget. So please, if you are one of those people who judges people for using poly fabric, stop. Anyway, I found these 3 fabrics from Psy Fabrics online. I had never purchased from them before, but I decided to give it a go after hearing a recommendation. And the shipping was pretty quick, the prices were reasonable, and these are all their matte satin. I think they call it something slightly different than that, but they're like the matte bridal satins, poly bridal satins, and they have it in the brighter pink, the lighter pink for the accents, and the white. And I got enough fabric here to do my 1830s dress and my 1950s dress. So you might be expecting 2 historical Disney projects from me. Just throwing that hint out there. But I'm super excited to dive in today. Now, of course, I have just done a dress from 1836, 1837. So this one is similar-ish to that, but it is not identical because, again, this dress is pretending to be from the 1780s. So the skirt is going to be exactly the same, frankly. I mean, I'm probably going to pleat and or cartridge pleat and or both the whole thing around. I don't think I'm going to have to line it with organdy though, which is good because I don't have enough, and also that organdy whole issue, if you know, if you watched my 1830s video, you know. But luckily this fabric is quite kind of stiff on its own, and so I don't think I'm going to need to line it. I think it's going to have enough body that once it's over the petticoats, it will do okay, hopefully. The bodice, on the other hand, is fairly different. This bodice is a pointed front bodice, which frankly is not very common for this era. At the very end of the 1830s, we start to see pointed bodices coming in, but it's really more of a 40s thing. So that's one of those elements that they're taking from the 1780s, I would say, and putting into 1830s language. And the sleeves are also very slim. So again, very odd for this time period. So the sleeves will be different, the bodice will be different. I think I'm gonna have to attempt a back closing bodice, even though I have no one here to help me fit it. I think I'm going to call my friend Emily to help me fit it, because with a pointed front, it just looks so much better if you have a back closing bodice. So I think I'm gonna have to do that. And there are certain things that I'm probably going to change from this fashion plate to make it look a little bit more like Cinderella as well. For example, I'm already intending that the bottom ruffle here is going to be white, and that on top of that bottom ruffle, I'm going to have swags of the light pink with the light pink bows, because that's how Cinderella's dress is. And I'm probably going to change up the sort of shawl that is going on this pattern to make it a little bit more Bertha-ish like Cinderella's dress. So we're definitely changing some stuff up, but I think it's going to be obvious who I am 1830s does 1780s Disney bounding with this whole project. So all of that aside, let's go ahead and start sewing. So some updates on the Cinderella dress. I have cut out the panels, but since I don't seem to be able to do anything without having issues lately, when I went to go cut out the panels, it turns out that there are weird blue faded marks all the way through this fabric, like a lot of them, like randomly, some on the sides, some in the center, all over. And they're very light and faint, but they are definitely there. And so I have had to like cut around them basically. So I started cutting this last night, and obviously the fabric store was closed. So I did call them this morning, and they are going to send me the rest of this bolt, which is an extra 6 yards, which hopefully doesn't have the ink marks on it, but I'm not sure. And that way I can get both of this project and also the next project, hopefully both cut out, because at this point I'm having to do weird cuts on this project to get the skirt pieces cut out because they're so large that I am certainly going to run out of fabric before I get to the 1950s version of this dress. Because basically, like, I cut 2 of my skirt panels out, and those both have the marks that will wind up being in the bottom 12 inches of the skirt. So there will be underneath the white ruffles, so that's okay. But I did then go to do the 3rd panel, which I already cut out and serged, and then as I was trying to find which one was the top, because I knew that the bottom had marks in it, I found out there were also marks right in the middle of the panel. So then that panel is now going to get smaller things cut out of it, like bodice pieces and pockets and stuff. I have already cut my pocket pieces out of that panel, and I had to go find another uninterrupted place that had at least 37 inches, because that is the length that I need other than the ruffle, that it will not show any of those smudges. So I did find a piece, and I have cut it out. I now have all 3 panels cut out, all of the pockets cut out. Those are all ready to be attached together. But I also have 3 panels worth of stuff that has the inky marks on it, that I have smaller pieces that can be cut out of it, but I don't have that many smaller pieces, because basically the bodice pieces will come out of this plus the sleeves, and that's really all I have to cut out of this other than the next project. So Yeah, I did already cut piping strips. I cut the 1¼ inch strips just like I did on the last 1830s dress. I was doing that while trying to find a place that had no spots in it, so I just kind of got that end out of the way and cut those out. I don't know if it'll be enough, but hopefully. I cut 2 strips, and also these skirt pieces are 49 inches long and the full width of the fabric, except that the selvages are pretty wide on this, so full width of the fabric minus like an inch on each side. All right, in any case, now I can go ahead and attach all of those together, the 3 skirt panels and the pockets, leaving the closure in the back because that is where the bodice is going to close up. So the nice thing is I don't have to worry about closure and pockets in the same thing, but the closure will have to be in the back, so that kind of sucks. So I'm going to do all of that, hopefully get that done tonight. I'll probably pleat up the waist too. I'm going to do the knife pleats plus cartridge pleat combination, I think, because I have been really liking that. I'm a little bit worried that this fabric isn't going to want to pleat that well because it is polyester, so I'll have to see how that goes. But my goal is to get all of that done tonight because once I do that, then I can move on to the bodice. Unfortunately, because it is attached to the bodice, I do have to attach the skirts to the bodice before I can focus on the ruffle because I need to hem the skirt first to know where the ruffle needs to go. So it's a whole process and I will get there, but I don't know how much I will be accomplishing this week. So I wanted to point out that I'm actually pleating this skirt up differently than I have in the past. I don't know if you can see my little pink marks here, sorry for that bad lighting, but I have actually measured out my pleats. I don't usually do this because normally I just eyeball what it has to go to, but since this is another sample of like cartridge pleats in the back and knife pleats all the way the rest of the way around, there's not really like a certain amount that I have to pleat this to because the cartridge pleats can do that. So I'm marking here, it's every 3½ inches and then 1½ inches. And that is because, if you look over here, I've done some already. That is because there are 1½ inches between the pleats here, but I wanted the pleats to be deep enough that they could kind of be caught in the same pin and overlap right there. So right here, there's about a 1/4 inch overlap. And that 3½ as opposed to 3 gives me that depth. So I think I calculated overall that I need like 11 pleats to get to where I want the cartridge pleats, so that's not too bad. I'm hoping that will take up a good portion of this back piece because this fabric just feels really wide. I haven't actually measured it. I think it was only supposed to be 56 or 60 inches wide, but it feels very wide. So anyway, that's what I'm doing now. I'm working on all of my pleats. I've done this front half side and I'm trying to get the rest of them done tonight. So here she is so far. Hi, Lane. I know it doesn't look like much. It's just a pink skirt that is pleated, but I do like the way the pleats look. I think they are looking nice and uniform because, you know, I actually measured them this time, so that helps. I do still have to cartridge pleat the back over here, but I think all of this will pleat up okay into this little back area, hopefully. If not, I guess I will figure out what to do, but I'm going to do those cartridge pleats tomorrow, so we shall see. Look at the way, this is how stiff this fabric is. There's no organdy in this or anything. This is just this polymatte satin. Look how stiff this is. It's a little funny, but I am quite pleased with this, and I'm excited for how the rest of this is going to go. So a couple minor developments on the Cinderella project. For one thing, I actually took my fashion plate inspiration and found another fashion plate that has other elements that I really love, which is this one. And I have combined the two into my own sketch for Cinderella. Yes, I did trace the one fashion plate because this is what I have now. So I'm super happy. I think it's got all the elements I want. It's got that bow front, the kind of white semi-Bertha type thing going on here, and then the bows with the little bunting kind of here in the light pink, and then the white at the bottom. So the pink, the bright pink, will be underneath this white, and then the bunting will cover the gap of the two, and that's great. The one thing that I've been waffling about with this sketch, and I originally drew it in with it, then erased it, then drew it back in, is the point of the bodice right here. Because my original fashion plate inspiration does have that pointed bodice, because I think, again, it's 1830s does 18th century, and so they put that pointed bodice in there. The actual Cinderella dress does not have a pointed bodice, And honestly, depending on when you're looking in the 1830s, pointed bodices only really start to come in towards the end to be more popular. So this one having a pointed bodice and supposedly being from 1836 is honestly a little bit on the early side for pointy bodices. That's more of like an 1838-39 thing generally, which is again why I think it's kind of a costume element. But I'm not exactly positive when I'm setting this, because the other thing is that with sleeves like this, honestly, this did come into fashion in 1838, 1839 as well. So I'm kind of thinking maybe I should just embrace the whole super late 1830s thing, go with the pointed bodice and that fitted sleeve with the tiered ruffles. And I think that's what I'm going to go with, because when I drew the bodice point away, when I erased it, it just looked a little bit plain. And I feel like there's, even though the original dress doesn't have the point, I feel like generally speaking, when you think of like princess dress, you get that ball gown pointed bodice look. So I think I'm going to do it. At the very least, I am going to cut it with a pointed bodice, and I can always cut it off. It's not a big deal. So what I've done here is I have taken my bodice pattern and I've just added an extension of the point. Now, I thought that I used this bodice pattern for Governor Ratcliffe. Governor Ratcliffe has a pointed bodice. There was nothing note-wise on this pattern about a pointed bodice. So to be honest, I'm a little bit confused. Maybe I didn't use this for Governor Ratcliffe, and if I didn't, I don't remember what I used. But this is what I just used for the plaid dress, and so I know that it works well. So what I'm going to do here is, there were several markings that I drew on here for things with the plaid dress, like having an extension in the front for front closure, raising the neckline a little bit, that sort of thing. With this one, this is going to have a low, broad neckline, and so I actually don't want to raise this at all. I'm probably going to lower the neckline, but I figure I'm going to cut it out to what I had patterned, and I can always cut that away. So much easier to remove than to add. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to cut this out as is with the pattern, with my original center back marking as well, so that I have unfolded that, because I had folded it to here for the plaid one. So I've unfolded it, and I'm going to go ahead and cut everything out in probably, I'll go ahead and just do it in twill, because that will be the interlining if it works, the flat lining if it works. And I'm going to do that, and then I'm going to attempt to somehow fit it to myself, even though this is a back closing dress. So we'll see how that goes, but that is my goal, to get this bodice fitted at least mostly. I mean, like, if it has to be fitted as in where the hooks and bars go in the back, that's fine. That can happen later when I can have like Emily's help or something like that. But I do want to get to the point where I can cut out the bodice pieces in the pink. And yeah, that means I need to actually work on this. So I'm gonna get to it. The cartridge pleats are all done back here. I may need to go a little bit farther out just because it seems to have some extra room left around the waistline, so I might need to make that smaller. And I have also mocked up the bodice, though I have not yet tried it on. I did realize I didn't account for the dart in there, so that line is not quite right, but that's okay. And then the other thing that I'm thinking about is that I did do this with the 1830s pattern with the one tiny, tiny dart that was in my spring plaid dress video that I showed you guys, but I'm really tempted, since this is like a princess dress and that's kind of all about like that nipped in waist look, I'm super tempted to try this with my 1860s corset, maybe add more darts just to see what it would look like with like actual waist reduction. I think that I can use the same bodice pattern and just tweak the darts and maybe the side shaping to get that. So I don't know, we'll see tomorrow when I try it on which corset I decide to do. So a couple notes on progress. Obviously I have my corset and everything on right now, and I have the skirt on, but the back it's too big. Like, I need to figure out something to remove, I think, if I'm feeling this right, about 1 inch, because right now I've pulled up the cartridge pleats all the way and it's still overlapping by 1 inch, and you can't really overlap cartridge pleats. That's like not a thing. So I have to figure that out and see how to get that a little smaller. I mean, it might just be tightening up the pleats a little bit here and not going for that super even measured thing that I have now basted in place. It's not a big deal. I can make the ones that are like farther in the back a little bit deeper, and that will be an easy option for that. So let's take this off maybe and put the bodice mock-up on instead. So while I was filming the video that you will have seen last about the changing undergarments and everything, I forgot to try on the bodice while I had this corset on. But I did remember to attempt to try on the bodice while I had the 1860s corset on because I wasn't sure which one I wanted, and that didn't work. It was way too small on the bust. There was just no way. So what I've done to this bodice mock-up to attempt to try it on, even though it is back closing, is I have just taken the entire back part that is going to be used for facings and everything, and I've just done a really big seam. So right now I think it's about probably 1.5 inch seam allowance because it's going to be like folded in and have a closure and stuff, and then the front should meet with a 1/2 inch seam allowance. If it does, then it fits. If it doesn't, then I've got work to do. So let's see. Okay, this closes in the bust. That's a good sign. Just doing this by feel all the way down, I'm getting that 1/2 inch seam allowance. So I'm gonna go do this in the mirror and see if that's actually true. So I know that this is like super anticlimactic and you were probably hoping for lots of fitting issues and things to go wrong, but I did just use this pattern, so I kind of knew that it was going to fit pretty darn well. What I have done is I have drawn out the point, taking into consideration the fact that it didn't line up across the dart, so I've redrawn that point there, and then also I have redrawn the neckline. I'm just going to make it slightly more boaty, so it's going to meet up right about here, but it's going to go to there, and then in the back it's going to be a little bit lower as well, just to make it that slightly wider, more boaty neckline like I have in my sketch. And then of course the seam allowance will come off of that as well, so it will be a little bit wider, a little bit lower, and this will be slightly shorter because this is still the 1830s, that we are getting into the very end of the 1830s where the waist gets longer a little bit, but I already cut this and it's the shorter waistline because I didn't think about that. So I'm perfectly fine with where it's going to go at that higher 1830s waistline. And I mean, I'm doing the 1830s corset and everything too. One thing that does seem a little bit weird to me is that it seems a little bit tight across the bust right now. So I'm not sure why. Like right here, there's lots of room, but right here at the apex of the bust, it does feel a little bit tight. So I'm a little bit nervous about that, but like not nervous enough to cut a new mock-up. And my theory is this. If you try on a mock-up like this, do your fitting. Now, granted, this is going to be my interlining anyway, so it's obvious that I would use this as my pattern, but even if this wasn't, even if this was just a mock-up and I was going to cut a new one after fitting everything to this, don't go back to your pattern and use your pattern as what you use to cut out your fabric. Don't do that, because invariably, if you have tried on a mock-up made out of cotton, it has stretched in some way. Whatever way that might be. Like for example, right now, it might be stretching across the bust. I'm really not sure, but I'm not going to go and use my paper pattern to cut out my outer portion of this bodice. I'm going to use this right here, this mock-up, cut it apart, or, you know, seam rip it apart, and use this as my pattern because this has already put that ease into there. So that's my 2 cents for today. Is don't go back to your paper pattern. You can go back and make changes on your paper pattern based on this, but I still, even after you make those changes, I still would not cut your fabric, your outer fabric, out of that. Cut it out of your mock-up. Use that as your pattern. And if you've used a mock-up, save that with your pattern. Like if you've used a mock-up that works really well, but you're going to cut out new interlinings anyway, save that mock-up, put lots of notes on it, put it in your pattern envelope or baggie or however you store your patterns, save it with your pattern, because then you already have a mock-up for the next time that you go use that pattern. You can just pull that out, sew it together and be like, oh, okay, well, this is what I need to change today. Or, oh, perfect, it fits exactly. Let's just go ahead and cut out the actual fabric. So that's my 2 cents. I am going to rip this apart now and cut out my actual fabric. Do you ever do that thing where after you put your mock-up on, you leave your corset and stuff on so that it will hopefully force you to get to a point where you can do your next fitting, even though invariably 90% of the time you don't get to that and you've just been wearing a corset for 2 hours for no reason? Well, it paid off. To be honest, if I hadn't been wearing this corset, I would have stopped sewing probably an hour ago. I was supposed to stop sewing like about a half hour ago, but I completed the 2.5 hours of sewing and I now have a bodice. I again have pinned it up the center front, doing up a fake seam in the center back instead, and I'm actually coming up with more room than before, which is great. I needed that, but it's almost a little bit too much room, like right here, so there may be some tweaking that has to happen there. And kind of the unfortunate thing about that was that I was planning to pipe this seam, which means that it's not as alterable. But we're close enough to the point where I can, I think, close up this seam, open up the center back, and actually do facings and stuff, because the back seems to be fitting really quite well. I think there might be a little bit of extra room right here, but not even that much, which is amazing because I normally do wind up with extra room there. The rest of it is really feeling quite good. And it may also be that I can take out this excess room in the darts instead of in the center front, so that might be an option as well. But I do think I want to pipe that because the 30s loved piping. And if you do want to know a piping tutorial, it's not in this video, so I will link my recent springtime plaid 1830s dress up above and down below for piping tutorial there. But I did do the same piping on this bodice. I have these seams piped here, these piped here, and then on this one, since it will be a back closure, I will pipe the center front, and then also the arm size will get piped, and there will probably be piping on the sleeves, and what can I say? It's the 1830s. But I'm very happy to get to this point. I didn't think I was going to make it there tonight, so that is nice. However, it has brought up a weird kind of emotional memory, and that is one that I'm sure that many of you who are plus size, or especially who were plus size as children, can relate to, because the last time that I had a pink ball gown type bodice like this, it was when one had to be specially made for me when I was in Into the Woods in high school, because we rented costumes and all of the costumes that we rented didn't fit me because they were all standard sized, and I was made to feel very othered and all of that. So I don't know, it was just a weird feeling of suddenly realizing as I finished putting this bodice together, like, oh crap, that's the last time that I had a pink bodice. So hopefully this one will be filled with happy memories instead of like stressful, othering, bad memories from high school. But I am pleased with how this is going to be. This is not going to look anything like that high school bodice, and pretty sure it's already way better made than that one was too. So this will be nice and will be Cinderella, and I am excited to start putting it together. Since I have this on, the other part that I'm going to do right now is I'm going to mark the waist, because the way that I set skirts for pointed bodices like this when the skirt is attached to the bodice is that I actually just put the waist up here, like where it goes of the skirt, and affix it to the bodice at that point. And then sometimes I will cut away the excess skirt, and sometimes I will just leave it behind the point. It's kind of 6 in one, half dozen the other. So that is what I'm going to do. I'm going to kind of mark where that is, and that way I can also go ahead and next up just like attach the skirts to the bodice. Though to be honest, I probably won't do that yet because I want to do finishing and closures and sleeves and all of that other stuff, but it'll be good to have that marked while I have the corset in. So I'm going to get that done. But all of that being said, I know that I haven't actually done much for this video, like filming wise, because this has been a very similar project to my last project. But this is going to be the end of this week's vlog because I got my COVID vaccine today, my second one, and so I am expecting that tomorrow I will probably not be feeling well. And I plan to just lay on the couch and edit videos. So I do hope that you enjoyed this rather abbreviated vlog. If you liked this video, please go ahead and click the thumbs up icon. And if you'd like to see more videos like this from me, please go ahead and click subscribe and the little bell icon to be notified every time I post a new video. I do post videos here on YouTube twice a week with my sewing vlogs on Tuesdays and other costuming content out on Saturdays, but I post every day over on my Instagram, so please go follow me on Instagram. That's at Lady Rebecca Fashions. And if you'd like to support all of the work that I do on this channel, I do have a link to my Patreon and my Ko-fi accounts down below. And I'd like to give a special big shout out to my Edwardian level patrons, Heidi, Miyakyu, and Sharon. Thank you all so much for joining me today. Have a wonderful week, and I will see you very soon in my next video. Happy sewing!